May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our hope. Amen. There's something about Mary. Now, if you're familiar with that film from the 90s, good on you. If you're not, don't look it up. But there's something about Mary. There's something about Mary that's unique and different. At least I think there is. Now, you might wonder about what that is exactly, because of all of the characters that we'll talk about this Advent season, she's certainly the most familiar. In fact, I would say she's probably the most familiar, the most well-known of the characters in the Christmas story. I know it's supposed to be Jesus, but he hasn't been born yet. Mary's an interesting character. Gabriel's probably a close second. But that's only because we have no idea what angels are like, really. We just kind of make that up ourselves, don't we? But Mary, we get some information. The story tells us some things. The thing is, the story tells us things that aren't necessarily how we know Mary from the various traditions around Mary. It's a story we hear every year. In fact, the story is so familiar to us because we tell it so often that I thought it was pretty safe to retell it the way I did, because I thought you'd recognize all the moments in the story. Did you? Because that's how familiar the story is. And it's familiar not just because we tell it every year, but it's familiar also because it's in carols and songs that we sing. Of all of the characters in the Christmas story, other than Jesus, Mary probably appears most frequently in Christmas carols. And that's actually not a lot, by the way. She has a few of her own. There's a great carol from the 19th century called Gabriel's Message. The angel Gabriel from heaven came, his wings as drifted snow, his eyes as I actually sang it so often as a choir boy, I know it from memory, which is really disconcerting to me, because in that carol, Mary is described as both lowly maiden and highly favored lady. The traditions around Mary describe her with words like lowly and meek and mild, gentle. We have names for her that highlight the reason she appears in the story. Blessed Virgin Mary, Mary, Mother of Jesus. Mary has a bunch of other titles based on various traditions around Mary. Queen of the World, Mary, Queen of the World, is another one. Our Roman Catholic friends here in Bashaw, their church is called Sacred Heart of Mary. There are many traditions around Mary, and that's how we know her. That's how we know she's meek and mild. That's how we know she's lovely and gentle and quiet and submissive. I think there's a reason why we know those traditions. Isn't there, men? But the thing is, that's not in the story. There's nothing in the story that indicates Mary is like that at all. I don't think. And if you would like to interpret that way, be my guest. I'm going to offer you an alternate interpretation of that. Think about how Luke tells the story, first of all. He doesn't simply say, here's the story of Mary and the angel and the birth of Jesus. Luke begins by telling the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth, and who are the parents of John the Baptist, the one who will announce the coming of Jesus. And that isn't, I don't think, just because John is the one who will announce the coming of Jesus. I think it's because the story is very different. Not just because the angel Gabriel, who is named here, the angel visits Zechariah, not Elizabeth. Not just because Zechariah gets the song, Elizabeth gets the song, Mary gets the song. One day I'll stop confusing them. But in the story of Zechariah and the angel, Zechariah is terrified. It says, when the angel appears, Zechariah is terrified and filled with fear. The angel tells Zechariah what's going to happen, and Zechariah is kind of, no, we're too old, not going to happen. As a result of which, the angel says, yes, it is, and since you didn't believe me, you will not speak again until the child is named. Zechariah, by the way, is a priest in the temple whose job is literally to serve God. Then Gabriel goes to visit a poor peasant girl. And when the angel Gabriel appears to Mary, it doesn't say Mary was terrified and filled with fear. It says, Mary was perplexed by the angel's greeting and pondered what it could mean. She's not afraid. She wonders what's going on. And feel free to imagine what an encounter with an angel is like. To be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure, because I wasn't there in the first century, how first century people would understand that. If someone were to say, an angel appeared to me, how would they describe it? Because I bet it would be different than how our 21st century minds and hearts would describe the feeling of an angel. Might not. I don't know, I wasn't there. But just imagine if an angel appeared to you and started talking to you and telling you stuff. Especially if the angel began with, you are favored by God. Mary, full of grace. God is with you. Uh-oh, I wonder what that could mean. Or, wow, that's cool. I wonder what that means. But nowhere does it say Mary was terrified or afraid. Except, of course, then Gabriel says, don't be afraid, because that's where we get the fear part. But it wasn't in the description of Mary, it's Gabriel responding to her being perplexed and pondering. Maybe that wasn't the reaction that Gabriel was expecting, because she's supposed to be afraid. Again, I don't know, I wasn't there, but it sure sounds to me like not only was Mary not afraid, she was amazed and wondered what was going on. As Gabriel goes on and tells her what's going to happen, she doesn't say, no, that's not going to happen. I'm too young, I guess, in this instance, because we assume Mary is young. It never says that, but we assume that on the basis that she's described as a virgin. Although the first century meaning of virgin might be different than our 21st century understanding. And by the way, in the Gospel of Matthew, it says she's described that way because it's a fulfillment of a prophecy from Isaiah. And in Isaiah, the prophecy is a young woman will conceive and bear a child who will be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. She might not have even been young. We don't know for sure. And what's young in the first century? We don't know for sure. But her response isn't the same as Zechariah's at all. It's quite the opposite. Her response is more like, okay, how are you going to do that? And then Gabriel tells her. And her response to that is, okay, I serve God. Let it be as God wants it to be. So, the person whose job is literally to serve God in the temple is afraid and disbelieving. And the poor peasant girl is amazed and wonders and immediately says, I am a servant of God. It's no wonder Gabriel describes her as full of grace and favored by God. It's not because she's meek, mild, and submissive. It's because she's strong. She's strong in her faith. It is so well grounded. She does not question that it is possible, only how it will happen. And then she goes to see her cousin. With haste, it says. So it presumably in the story, since it says with haste, she didn't stop to talk to anybody on the way. So Joseph doesn't know yet. The family doesn't know yet. No one else knows. The first person to encounter Mary after the visit from the angel immediately says, you are the mother of Jesus. You are the mother of God. You're pregnant, and this is what is going to happen. This is who it is. Confirming right away her story. Then she has to go and tell everyone. Then there's a journey. I won't spoil what happens at the end of the journey, but let's just say she finds herself in a really awkward place to have a child. And again, we tell this story of how Joseph had to help her so much, apparently, and she had a donkey, and she rode on a donkey all the way there. The likelihood of them being able to afford an animal of any kind, let alone a donkey, is remote. And can you imagine, well, guys, we can't, but can you imagine being a pregnant woman riding on a donkey? Not the most comfortable ride. They didn't have an Uber. You would have to be pretty strong, pretty tough to get through all of this. So let's stop saying that Mary is meek and mild for a minute. Instead, let's wonder how God's favor and grace would rest on someone who was poor and had no standing, no social standing to speak of. Someone who had so little say in her life that her parents were trying to find her a match. Someone who had so little control over her life that, at least according to Matthew's account, and Joseph almost needed to be persuaded by a visit from an angel to not divorce her. The language is all very tricky, isn't it? Because you have to be married to divorce, don't you? But engagements in those days were different. It was a bigger commitment. Gifts changed hands. There's a year that you had to wait to get married. There was much more to it, much more, I'm going to say regulation, to it than there is today. More ritual. And so we've come up with these traditions around Mary that create, I think, a substantially different character for us than the one in the story. That's not to say in any way, that's not to say that Mary is any less favored by God. That's the key part of the story. There's something about Mary that makes her the person that needs to bear Jesus. I just don't think it's because she's meek and mild and weak. I think it's because she's strong in her faith. She's strong in her personality. She is strong enough in all of the things that she needs to be in order to fulfill this life that she's going to have. She may not know what's coming. Not the details. Gabriel's given her the macro version, and Elizabeth's confirmed that. But the day-to-day details, she has no idea. I don't think. And yet, she doesn't doubt that it needs to happen. There is a groundedness in her faith, a trust in God, that is why she is favored by God. Favored. Such an awkward word. We're all favored by God because we're all loved by God. Mary is a great example for us, not because she is meek and mild and submissive, but because she is strong in her faith. She is strong in her expression of that faith. She's not afraid to wonder and be amazed at all of the things that God can do. All of the ways in which God can be in the world, not the least of which is in her Son.